Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the JT Foxx Show. As you know, we interview some of the biggest names in the world. But this one is someone that I've been very, very, very excited. And actually, I think it took like 4 months just to get this interview. And it's something I've actually been thinking about for years. And, his book, Never Split the Difference. It's probably one of the best business books that I've ever read. And I don't mean like people like the business book because we live in a society where everybody says middle it. And I don't like that term. I've never liked that term. And so split the difference sounds so much more poetic. And Chris Voss is not only a man who has a tremendous amount of accomplishment, but he literally talks the talks and walks the walks. We're talking about someone who's a former FBI hostage negotiator. He's a CEO of the Black Swan Group. He's an entrepreneur, best-selling author. And in a way, he's been able to parlay his knowledge and make it available for the everyday man, the employee, the employer, the entrepreneur, and that's why it's that good. So please welcome Chris Voss. How are you, Chris?
Hey, I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Now, Chris, where are you taking off somewhere? That giant headset looks like you're about to ladies and gentlemen, this is Chris Voss here, ready for takeoff. Like, are we
You
taking
know, the
off somewhere?
really the really cool thing about this headset, I was on a Zoom conference, shocking, I know, a couple of months ago, and one of the guys on the conference, his voice came across fantastic, and he had this headset on. I mean, and everybody is trying to find a good microphone that works. That also, you don't want to look like you're wearing an aqua lung that you're underwater. So what's functional, what works really well, and is simple. And I sent the guy a text, and he said, "Man, it's a trucker's headset. It's." He said, you got to count on the truckers. They want something that works, it's comfortable, and it makes them sound good. I said, you gotta send me the link to where you bought it. I gotta buy one. So I've been using this baby ever
Like
since.
$40. It's probably $40. Is that what it is?
I don't, if it might have been 100. It
Uh,
wasn't any more than that. But
yeah.
I've been happy with it. I mean, I use it for all my stuff now.
So Chris, let's take you. I know you've said this a million times, which especially you and I are both on Clubhouse, so telling the same story over and over gets a little fatigued. But to put this in context, is we have people from 104 countries watching this as well. What's your background? I know you've got one of the most fascinating stories on here as well. I don't know, maybe it's the FBI. If you were just like I don't know why. I think it adds a little bit of mystery to it. I like FBI, CIA. It always has this
Magic
I don't
three
know.
letters, right?
Right, like exactly. It's got this secrecy, to it as well that adds credibility. So what's your background?
Yeah, well, I was an FBI agent and sort of the succession of experiences. FBI agent, I was on FBI SWAT, and then I became an FBI hostage negotiator. I worked terrorism in New York. And then I ended up running our entire international kidnapping negotiation response. I came up with a strategy for about 7 years. Any American that got kidnapped anywhere in the world, it was my job to come up with a negotiation strategy to get them out and to deploy that strategy.
And how did you go from that retiring to now going in the entrepreneur world, the corporate world, speaking all over, being an entrepreneur? Because a lot of people just would have been, here's my pension, and what made you want to, or was it an accident that just all of a sudden maybe you did it once or twice and then you exploded?
Now, when I first started training to become a hostage negotiator, I was initially directed to go volunteer on a suicide hotline. And, this was a long time ago, but suicide hotline, it was phenomenal experience. It was really a master class in emotional intelligence, applied emotional intelligence to help people get to a resolution quickly, to move on with their lives. Establish relationship, boil down a problem, challenge the other person to act. The only way you get people to act is if they rise to the challenge. It has to be their idea. And when I was doing that, the stuff was so powerful. I thought this stuff's got to apply in everyday life. So I started just applying it in my personal life, in my professional life, and then the hostage negotiation. It was a great marriage of all of those things. A couple of years before I got out of the FBI, I was lucky enough to go to Harvard Law School's negotiation course. And while I was going through there, they said to me, look, you're doing the same stuff in a hostage negotiation that everybody else is doing in business negotiation. The stakes are different, but the dynamics are the same. It's all about human decision making, and every human being has the same basic wiring. So I just kept building on that. Retired from the FBI, retired. I like to think of it as changing jobs, moved on, and started teaching business negotiation at Georgetown University in the MBA program to the part-time students. And what's the critical thing about that? You're teaching part-time students. They're part-time because they're working during the day. They're ambitious, curious people. And so if they come to class at night, they want answers. And I gave them negotiation strategies that worked. And they started making huge differences in their jobs, in their day-to-day. So a couple of years later, my son and I partnered up with Tall Ruz and wrote Never Over Here, Never Split the Difference. And the book has been killing it. It's a category killer in business negotiation. I checked this morning. 3 of the top 5 spots are on my book in different formats. It's about great negotiation, great collaboration. That's kind of how it all evolved.
So I know that there's the idea of conceptual implementation, right? Something that in one industry can be applied to another industry, sometimes even more effective. But sometimes people like you might be get like typecast, like, oh, you're an FBI negotiator. What does that have to do with the business, right? Component of it, which you kind of touched on upon it as well. What are the similarities? And maybe go back to what was your role with the FBI as terms of negotiation? Because isn't the policy is to never negotiate with terrorists, right? So that is that so you had to
That's
get
not the
something.
policy.
That is not the policy. Okay, clear that up for us.
No, as it turns out, it's not the policy. That's a nice soundbite. That's what everybody says is a soundbite. We don't negotiate with them. We negotiate against them. The U.S. policy is to not make concessions, which is not the same thing as negotiating, because one aspect of negotiation is information gathering. If you're any good at it, why would you want to why would you not want to gather the information about the terrorists? Of course you would. So it's a soundbite. And even the president that originally signed the current U.S. policy into policy was back in 2002, George W. Bush. Interesting that policy in one form or another has survived to this day through Democrats and Republicans, which is an indicator that it's a really solid policy. But I was down in Columbia working a case right after he signed the presidential directive. And he said publicly a couple of days later, we don't negotiate with terrorists. The ambassador in Colombia says, President of the United States just said on TV, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Are you calling a president a liar? And I was like, all right, I know that's what he said, but let me show you what he signed. There's a difference between sound bites and implementation, which in many cases is really the key to real negotiation. You got to be careful not getting distracted by a momentary soundbite, and you dig deeper and find out what's really going on.
Can you give us an example of a hostage negotiation and the principles by which that can be related in business? So kind of get a deep dive of the way you think. I don't want to do the same kind of interview you've done where, and by the way, everyone's got to pick up the book. I don't really want to go too much into the book other than saying you get it, because what's the point of us talking about the book if they're going to listen to it here? I need them to get the book. If I tell you it's a great book, it's a great book. And I think it's helped me, and I'm really good at negotiation. People call me and say one of the best at it because I understand, but there was other principles, a different angle of negotiation that I hadn't heard before. And also too, everyone says, don't middle it, which is split the difference. And ironically, in your book, you actually explain why. And I think people were told, and I think what I like about your book is there was not so much as how, but understanding the why. And if you understand the why, you can then dominate the how, because now you know what sides are going to. And I think that's a mistake that people make. So I want everybody to pick up that book. Because people just sit there, what's the book about? And they're like, well, why do I read it? You just explained it to. I don't know if you agree with that negotiation tactic or that interview tactic, but in my experiences, I get a lot more book sales for my guests by doing that, by telling them just go buy the book because I said so. Because now the curiosity is there. What do you think about that style?
Well, you gave me a lot of stuff to think about. Which one you want me to start with?
Well, let's go back. Well, actually, the premise of you, before we go into the question, in an interview, most people, they just kind of talk about the book. And then they're like, they're hoping it was a good interview, they get the book. What do you think about the style of actually saying, wow, this guy's so brilliant at this, I have to get the book now, as opposed to giving a synopsis of the book? Because I think there's a lot of bad interviews. You know, I saw a couple of your interviews. I'm like, why are you asking, like, what's the book about? First of all, you could have paraphrased it and then taken one story and elaborate. I just feel like it's more generalist. What do you think about it? About the how the positioning of it, when whether we're selling a book, we're selling a negotiation. Do you think negotiation is about positioning in a way, how everything is positioned, like how the players are, how the chess pieces go to before, that everything has to be positioned correctly?
Well, that's an element. And a lot of people are consistently trying to relate chess to negotiation as an analogy to understand it. Now, here's why that breaks down. First of all, chess is a sequential move game. I go, you go, I go, you go. If you're into game theory, you understand it. Chess is just a more complicated version of tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe is a sequential move game, evenly matched opponents. The person who goes first will never lose. Evenly matched opponents in a sequential move game, the person who goes second will never win. Now, when they're evenly matched, what's going to happen most often is they're going to tie, which is why the world's great chess grandmasters consistently tie, consistently draw, which before I understood sequential move games and the fact that chess and tic-tac-toe are analogous, I was always mystified by that. How come these guys are tying all the time? How could you have a tie? So that's one of the constraints of a sequential move game. Secondly, the biggest constraint and the biggest reason why chess is a poor analogy is because in life, the pieces don't move with every move. Or in chess, the pieces don't move with every move. In life, we're all tied together with a web of tension, as Herb Cohen would say in his book. You can negotiate anything, and that web of tension is emotions, which means that imagine a chessboard that every time you move one piece, all the other pieces on a board become anxious and they move a little too. So by the time 3 moves have been made, the board is completely reset, which is why you need planning in negotiations. But you have to understand that by the, if with the initial contact with the battlefield, to quote General Eisenhower, the plan doesn't go out the window. By the time you've got 3 contacts with the battlefield, it's going to be reset. So you got to be cautious about the chess analogy because the board is resetting as you move, number one. And we're dealing with human beings, which means we're connected by this web of tension, the web of emotions. So the smart move, forgive the terminology, the high percentage success move is to understand what the emotions are and how they're going to impact the board. Emotions are principally negative. Fear of loss is the biggest single decision-making factor in all of human existence, which gets us back to part of your question before was, how does hostage negotiation apply to business negotiation? What does that have to do with it? Good question. Human decision-making, regardless of the circumstances, is bounded by the same rules. The decision-making behind what the leader of a terrorist organization does and the decision-making behind what the CEO of a company does is bounded by the same rules. They got the same wiring in their brain. Neuroscience has shown that to be a scientific fact, not speculation. So if you know what those rules are, then you just apply those rules regardless of the circumstances.
So give us an example in depth of your going in. And by the way, first of all, let me ask you, can negotiation be taught, or is this a natural instinct that you have? Some people say like, oh, you have to be born with that instinct. Or is it something like how many hours? First of all, it's 10,000 rules of mastering something. If I master 10,000, learn everything is about negotiation, do I really become a great negotiator? Or is there, you have to develop your intuition, your EQ, your emotional intelligence, your situational awareness? Or is it just something that, you got it or you don't? And some people are just not going to be good at negotiation no matter what they do.
Yeah, Daniel Coyle wrote a book called The Talent Code. And Coyle says that nothing is inborn, that it's all learned, and that the prodigies simply got interested before anybody else noticed and started on their journey to 10,000 hours sooner than anybody else thought. There's another book out there that I've come across called Talent is Overrated. The guy who wrote, I can see his face. I can't think of his name. It'll come to me. Brilliant, brilliant writer.
I'll Google it. Did you get it?
I'm sorry.
I can Google it if you want.
I'll just keep going. It'll come to me. But actually, the science tends to indicate
Jeff Colvin.
Talented is overrated.
Yeah, by his name is Jeff Colvin.
Okay, excellent, very good, thank you. The more people study it, the more people either completely or mostly dismiss the idea of inborn talent. You can't teach me to be 7 feet tall, but there's very little else that you can't teach me. So what's the point? The point is there's hope for everybody. I'm listening to a lot of Andrew Huberman these days, neuroscientist out of Stanford. Now, it does become more difficult for us to begin to learn and adapt after age 25. There's a number of neuroscience reasons behind that. But the word is difficult, not impossible. So at any given point in time, you can teach yourself. It principally just requires focus and rest, is Huberman's contention. 2 essential elements, which is one of the reasons why we're reading so much these days about the importance of sleep and sleep hygiene and what goes with that. Part of that is if you've adequately focused on learning a new skill during the day, you've done what Huberman says, you've initiated the process to learn, which really embeds itself and completes itself while you're asleep, while your brain is recharging. So your original question is negotiation ability inborn or is it learned? I would say that it's learned, number one, but also the other key issue is in any human performance skill, as Jim Camp, the author of Start With No, would say, it's perishable. It's not riding a bike. And if you're not at least maintaining your skills on all perishable skills, every human being has the same choice for tomorrow. You're either going to be where you are now, you're going to be worse, or you're going to be better. Of those 3 choices, 2 out of 3 require effort. It requires effort to stay even, not as much as it requires to improve. But without effort, you will atrophy. And negotiation is a skill that you will atrophy if you don't work at it at least a little bit each and every day.
So I want to come back to a story about where you can demonstrate and break down for us the human element of a hostage negotiation. What were they doing? What were they asking? What did you do back and forth? And then see if we can break down. And when you say I did this, and we can explain the reasoning. So I want to get inside your brain about what were you thinking. And by the way, when you're doing these negotiations, do you have carte blanche to do whatever you want, or you got to put up the flagpole and say this person wants this, or were you given carte blanche?
Neither one. I could talk about anything without agreeing to it. My first move in any negotiation is not to take myself hostage. What do I mean by that? If you can't make me say yes, if I don't think you can make me say yes, I'm free. I could talk about anything, which was really the key to our hostage policy, which we implemented back in 2002. I could talk to you about concessions all day long. That doesn't mean I'm giving in to any of them. I could talk to you about what your perspective is all day long and fully understand it. That doesn't mean I've agreed or disagreed with any of it. And as soon as you start to draw those fine lines, your power to negotiate then is virtually unlimited. It's a very narrow path, and it's an unlimited one simultaneously. So I talk about anything all day long. That doesn't mean I've agreed to it.
So is that the first step to get them to talk, like to get and say, explain their position? Step number 1. Number 2, what they want, and then why.
Before you go too far down the path, The whole process of getting them to explain their position, find out what they have to say, is lubricated, is accelerated if I start to speculate on what their position is out loud. And what's going to happen is the parts of their position that I get, they're going to immediately tell me, they're going to feel satisfied with, they're going to feel understood. We're going to move forward quickly. The parts of their perspective that I don't get, they will correct me and I will get right, and we will move forward quickly. If I wait for them to fully express it themselves without my help, it'll take much longer, and they're going to flounder around anyway. And plus they're not going to know whether or not I understand. And the real initial objective is making sure I understand, whether you're from Al Qaeda or whether you're from IBM. You want to make sure I understand.
Wow. So that's step number one. And then what's step number two of that as well?
Well, a lot of I'm going to find out how much of this I will simply get what I want by demonstrating understanding. If your only principal objective, if your only barrier to agreeing with me is making sure that I understand, I want that out of the way because it didn't cost me anything. You can speculate back and forth with that percentages all day long. You could say, all right, so how often is that going to happen? That won't happen that often. I don't care how long it happens. I don't care. If it happens 1% of the time, that's a high enough success rate for me because I'm not wasting time spinning my wheels, which is a real issue in negotiation. How much time is lost spinning your wheels when you're looking down at the speedometer going like, it says we're going 70 miles an hour. Well, your wheels are going 70 miles an hour. You're actually not moving. So I need to get traction as quickly as possible on the issues that I need to get traction on. I got to sort those out. Now, I will tell you that fully 50% of your deals will make themselves once the other side feels understood. But let's say that you think that that's nonsense, that it's a far lower percentage than that. I don't care. All I know is my most valuable commodity is my time. And I want to get the stuff out of the way that I don't have to spend time on as quickly as possible. And that's the way I do it.
So right, like the arguments of, I think the house is worth, let's use an example, Zillow
Right.
says my house is worth $500,000. No, it's really worth 410 based on this, and you don't have that as well. That's an automatic recipe for disaster, that bashing of the head, because then it becomes about the ego rather than agreement. So you're
Yes.
saying we should just let them say, why do they think it's worth that, and sort of kind of like, because there's that temptation to be like getting down people's throat. That's crazy. Like, it's not worth that. You know what I mean? So you're saying what that does, that just pushes them further away.
Causes them to dig their heels in more. Like, of all the negotiations that anybody has ever described to me, here's what no one has ever said to me. Man, I made that argument and I got what I wanted. And then we made another great deal. Anytime anybody ever describes having come to an agreement by arguing or explaining their way into it, they never talk about a great next deal. It's always a one-off. And as it turns out, it was a long time ago. Because people that have these great, grand slam home run deals, they're so addicted to the memory of the feeling of the satisfaction of the moment. They don't pay attention that those deals are farther and farther and farther apart, until finally it's been years since they've done anything that changed their life. And they're treading water. They're actually slowly drowning more and more. And that's the hard thing. That's an assertive's move. And I'm a natural born assertive. And right after I got out of the FBI and I was teaching at Harvard, I sat down with the CEO in Boston, and he's telling me, he says, I got a reputation of getting the best deal every time. That's my reputation. And now nobody will deal with me. Says, I have an agreement on my desk. The CEO on the other side of the table has agreed to each and every point. There's nothing in this deal that he hasn't agreed to, and he won't sign it because of my reputation. As soon as it gets out that he's made a deal with me, his board's going to fire him. And that's where you leave everybody that you beat into submission. You either kill them or you line them up for execution. They can't continue to deal with you. And that's not this recipe for long-term success.
I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to ask you a question about me. So I'm known as a polarizing figure on stage, right? Very straightforward. Kind of figure Simon Cowell, like, very straightforward, very no BS. I'm really good at reading body language. I could tell if people are going to be successful or not just by looking. So I've mastered that craft, and I'm very quick on my feet. But I have core values of loyalty, never screwed anyone. Many people in my life are still in my life. It's my core principle. But I find that when people get advice and they don't like it, what I said, even though it's true, right? Because I deliver it in a very straightforward point. And if I'm talking to a high level person, they can go back and forth and they can give me the argument I give them. But when I'm dealing with a person that is maybe not on my level, what they do is they revert to lies, lying about their numbers, lying about the deal, right? Which is what they do. And what I'll do is I'll extract it. Now, part of it is my personality, like for show. I'm not necessarily like that in business, but the stage show. And what I find is that the people that go, like, they get upset, then they turn into like the enemy. Like, I always want to take shots at me, which creates drama, i.e. on Clubhouse, right? Where people like, oh, you were too tough. The person that I coach, they're fine with it. But the people that are listening, they get uncomfortable with it and they make a deal with it. Now, I'm a intimidating figure in business, and because I'm straightforward and I read body language, but I feel like that resistance and that polarization, part of it is what made me to become where I am today, which is extremely successful. But it makes my job very, very hard, which creates conflict, like people making up fake stuff, fake rumors, fake lies, anything out of context. And you are a very straightforward personality, I could tell, but you do it in a way, like very methodically, like in a way, like I could tell you're straightforward to the BS. And if you have a problem, you'll say it, but you do it in a very different way. Like you take your foot off the accelerator before you punch back in. So how does one, like, do I change my style? Because it's been very effective up until this part, but I'm very well aware of the downsides of it and the polarization of it. Or I am who I am, and I'm never going to please everyone. And people want to do business with me is great. But now the story you're telling me right now resonated in my head about how many people don't want to do business with me because of that. And so that triggered me, what you just said, right? And I'm the type of person I'll be like, oh, because that you just triggered me when you said that. So what do you think as a who deals with high level performance people?
Are you against evolving?
No, I think evolving is the most important thing. How you change is how you succeed.
Right. Okay. So a couple things that I'd ask you to consider thinking about. There's a saying, what got you here won't get you there. I'm a natural born assertive. And one of my hostage negotiation colleagues, kind of when I was in the unit where it was the epitome of my negotiation career, one of my colleagues said to me, dealing with you is like getting hit in the face with a brick. Now, I would describe myself as straightforward, direct, and honest. The people that are on the other end of it say, this is getting hit in the face with a brick. And I thought, I'm not sure that's good for me long term. Now, how do I take a couple of miles an hour off my fastball and still stick to my principles, still stick to my points? So what enhances my ability to be direct, but it doesn't feel like getting hit in the face with a brick to the other side? Now, I will tell you, one of the most straightforward, in your face, my way or the highway negotiators on earth. I've had a couple of conversations described to me that this person was involved in. And the essence and the sum up substance of it was, you do it my way or you don't do it. However, she didn't say it like that. And it's Oprah. Now, I can promise you from the conversations that have been relayed to me that Oprah is every bit as unequivocal, I always have trouble with that word. And direct in message as Donald Trump is. You get done with a conversation with Oprah, you have no doubt where she stands and what you're going to have to do in order to move forward. But Oprah does it in an emotionally intelligent way. She doesn't do it publicly. She does it very gently. She's got great instincts. And it's actually one of the rules that we've adopted, because I realized we were doing it in a hostage negotiation, but I didn't have a great example in the real world. We call it the Oprah Rule, which is the last impression is the last impression. You deal with Oprah, and the very last thing out of her mouth, not the first thing, the very last thing is the expression of unconditional positive regard, love, support, nurturing. She will be on your side no matter what happens. Now, most people put that at the beginning of the conversation because there's this great red herring out there about a first impression. And then what shocks me is I'll get into a conversation with someone or an interaction, and they'll say, you know, you're wonderful. I love you. I think so much of you. And the last thing out of your mouth is, and we resent what you've done. And we're going to hurt you if you don't agree. I'm like, what happened to all the stuff at the front? Just taking that stuff at the front and putting it at the end is a game-changing issue. And as it turns out, right after I left the FBI, I'm at a conference for the Gallup organization. They're sitting on a ton of human nature data, and they say that people do not remember things the way they happened. They remember the most intense moment and how it ended. This could be called the Gallup rule. The last impression seeds the next impression. You get into a dispute with Oprah. She's going to explain in a very soft and gentle way what the issues are. And the last thing out of her mouth, and this is pretty much word for word of what I've been told she has said, and I believe it. No matter what your decision is, I want you to know that I will always love you and I will always support you. I will always be on your side. And then people go, okay, Oprah, whatever you say. So there's some sequencing here of how the brain works, and there's how the message is delivered. And people are remarkably resilient if you let them be. And how the message is delivered ends up being the critical factor in whether or not the message lands.
It's phenomenal. By the way, I'm very good friends with Stedman, Oprah's significant other, and I've heard similar stories. I tell you a couple stories after we get off air that you could add to your repertoire. It would be very interesting to have that. But that's so interesting. I like it. And then there's another quote that hit me in the face. You've hit me in the face three times in the last 3 days. One of them is pay attention to your delivery. If you find yourself arguing or explaining, you're losing. If you find yourself complaining, you're losing. Conversely, if you don't make it about yourself, if you demonstrate understanding, you're winning. Can you explain that? I felt that was talking to me directly, but I still didn't get the whole essence of that. But when I saw that, I was like, wow, that's like talking to me. But I wasn't sure what it meant, but I thought it was talking to me, which is very weird because normally I get the essence. So if you can explain that, that was a great quote, by the way.
Yeah, well, as a general rule, we don't understand how bad explaining something is to people because there's so many false examples of it working in TV shows and in the media. And there TV shows constantly, all the time, and in the media, movies, television, fiction. Somebody explains something, and then the people that are explaining it to go like, "Oh, thank God you put it that way. I'm in." And we don't notice that it never works in real life. I mean, Ronald Reagan said, "If you're explaining, you're losing." Explaining your position is self-intellectual stimulation. It makes you feel really good. It doesn't really get you anywhere. And actually explaining, it feels bad on the other end. I mean, again, search for examples in your mind when somebody says, "Oh my God, the way they explained it to me made me feel so good." But we have all these examples where explaining is a wonderful thing. And I'm watching Tom Cruise movie from a few years back, A Few Good Men. Brilliantly written. There's very little about that movie. It's not phenomenal. And he talks about his characters talking about his father, the attorney, and saying, my father wants me to make an argument, as if it was this exalted form of being. And it's held up for us as being making an argument as being this great thing. Well, if making an argument was a great thing, we would universally love lawyers.
Mm.
And I'm not sure that's the case.
No.
What was it, the Shakespeare quote? First we kill all the lawyers. So, that's the first part. And then just with the tone of voice, like, it's shocking what a difference in your tone of voice could be. And it's part of what gets something to land, because your gut instinct to assert is a necessary element for effective negotiation. How is the other side ever going to give you what you have to have if you don't tell them? If you want them to read your mind, the percentages on success on that are poor. So you have to assert. It's just how you do it is a critical issue.
So does the bringing down the level. So if I have the power, exert my power, my brand, my wealth, my success that I have, does bringing your power down to an equal level, could that hurt you in a way because there's that less of that intimidating factor? Like there is a level of intimidation, like in a negotiation, right? If you don't do this, we'll have the entire U.S. government on you. Obviously I can understand that could backfire, but does power and a bit of intimidation in a long term, are you saying it works against you? Because
Absolutely.
right. Well, I don't know if you heard the story of Donald Trump. I know the family very well, and I know him personally. And George Ross, who's his right hand man, 47 years, is my coach now. I've known him for 10 years. He's worked for me for the last 4. And he said to me that many times when people were negotiating with Donald Trump, um, they would be like the most prepared ever, like because they know they have a big meeting. And what he would do is he would just pass it on to the kids, right? Ivanka or Don or Eric, and then they would lower their negotiation barrier, and then they are very astute, and then they would use that as leverage, and he often used that as a deflectionary method. um, do you think that that's true? Is that work, or is that just a fantasy story I was given?
Well, there are a lot of really interesting questions in there. I mean, let's start with power and intimidation.
Okay.
I believe in long-term success, long-term relationships. Donald Trump has held up an awful lot as a negotiator, but let's just take some outside criteria. Where did they start and where are they? I don't have the listing of Oprah's net worth, but I guarantee it's higher than Trump's. Where did she start? Where did he start? He started with a father in New York City who was a millionaire, multimillionaire, ridiculously successful developer in New York City already. So he had the finances he needed. He had pre-existing relationships. He had a pre-existing track record. And there's an issue that if you don't deal with a kid, you're going to poison a well in a whole lot of other ways. What did Oprah start with?
Nothing.
And one might, let's take away the economics that she didn't start with. Let's factor in the fact that she was a woman. She was a black woman. She's a black woman from a low income, and just start adding up the stuff. So let's take a measure of distance. Oprah's not known for winning through intimidation. Oprah is also not a shrinking violet. She's not a pushover. Among the things that she did, she got the 2 best interviews ever with both Lance Armstrong and Michael Jackson. Those were the results of negotiations. I never met Michael Jackson. I sat next to Lance Armstrong on an airplane, had a great time with him. I happen to think a lot of the guy. Don't want to get drug off into a discussion of good or bad on him, but I think the world of the guy, having met him and experienced him firsthand. Oprah got him to admit to everything on camera. Everything. What's the blowback from that? Where have you seen publicly that Lance Armstrong is unhappy with Oprah? You ain't seeing it. What's the residue of those relationships? How much did Michael Jackson publicly hate Oprah after she interviewed him? No blowback. What does that do to your continuing success? How has Oprah changed? How many lawsuits are there against Oprah? Who's had problems with Oprah? Who's continuing to lay out there just waiting for the moment to pay Oprah back? Who's continuing to lay out there just waiting for the moment to pay Donald Trump back? Who in Washington is saying to Donald Trump, oh my God, please come back and deal with us some more? Who in New York is waiting to say to Donald Trump, oh my God, please come back. Please don't live in Florida. Please come back to New York. We miss you so much.
That's
Look
good.
at the residue and whether or not you want to deal with that residue.
Do you think Oprah versus Trump in a presidential election prior to that, take away Hillary, do you think Oprah beats President Trump?
I think the only reason Oprah isn't president of the United States is because she looked at the job and said to herself, why do I want to go through that?
I'm with you. No, that's fascinating. You know what? I take a look at the long term. I've never heard that is such a, and yes, obviously one became president, one's had a lot of success, but the collateral damage is definitely there. While one is the roads are still paved with gold, and the other one is just it's all chopped up, and there's still a road. But that's so interesting. How
And
do
and,
you
and
better your?
if I could interrupt for a minute too on Donald Trump, there are a lot of things that he brought to government that needed to be brought to government. And it's going to be 100 years before those things are recognized because of all the noise around everything else.
That's my next point too. The personality thing. I feel sometimes I'll do some things for people and I don't feel appreciated by it, or they're appreciated in the moment, and then later on I get stabbed in the back or they turn or for whatever reason. Is that a reflection on me, or is it more a reflection on them? If I did the right thing, I helped them out, I did situation, they said they'd be loyal for life, and then I find themselves loyal to a better opportunity and turns stab me in the back when I help them. And so I'm trying to say, is it me, or is it just a flaw in their character?
Or it's both, or it's also a flaw of the process. I mean, reality of the situation is usually there are two things that are simultaneously true, two or things that are simultaneously true that are very contradictory. And this really fairly recently opened up my thinking because, the example that said, your parents did the best they could for you and they really hurt you. Both those things are true. So begin to hold things that are contradictory and true in the same situation. Now, what I would say is of the negative residue that is left in my wake and in your wake, some of it's going to be simply the result of the dynamics of the situation. Some of it's going to be a result of the shortcomings of the other side. Some is going to be as a result of mistakes I made. One of the rules that we live by in my company is I'm willing to be smarter today than I was yesterday. The only sin in my company is to not learn. A guy that I hold in very high esteem, Michael Mulgill, runs a company out of Atlanta called Crisp Video, does video for lawyers, marketing. But Michael says, if you're not embarrassed at who you were a year ago, you didn't learn enough in the last year. So as long as it's an ongoing learning process, and realize that you're not going to be perfect, you're going to hurt people inadvertently, and you're not going to be able to fix it. That's just going to go from the territory, and that shouldn't stop you from learning from the experience.
Fascinating. I don't get fascinated by too many conversations. I'm like fascinating. Let's get to the book. Why did you write it? And why did you write it? And the headline, how did that come up about and the core? Because I think everybody's going to pick it up. I think I'm going to buy 100 copies. I will buy 100 copies and distribute it to all my friends and family, because I think this is actually, I think this is conversation is better than the book. I thought the book was great. But I thought in terms of conversation, this is more vertical and more deep than probably any conversation I've had in a long time. So very fascinating.
Thank you.
And now also I can go back now to what you said when people watch this. And now I think I'm going to read the book one more time, because I think now I have a better understanding of some of those concepts. I think your book is the type of book that you don't read once, because if you haven't mastered it, like I think too many people will read a book one time rather than reading your book 10 times. Because I think if you read a book 10 times, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're now mastering it, so that every time something happens, you can relate it to something, because our brains are like leaky buckets. So talk about the books, but why, how did it come about, and the title, and why, what the theory is.
Well, so, as soon as I got out of the FBI, and I went back to school, then there very entrepreneurial colleagues said, put out a book, get a book out there, get one out now. Doesn't have to be any good. Get one out. It's a business card. Um, if you haven't got a book out, people want to know why. Now we delayed it for a number of years. My son and I, my son involved every step of the way because we wanted to feel like we had the process end to end. I was lucky enough. We were teaching at Georgetown. So we had a lab to experiment with the negotiation techniques. And we had students write out about their successes in a very analytical way so that we could lay it out exactly. So we had no shortage of examples. We had all the data we needed to back it up. So I wanted to make sure we had a good system end to end, and that we had no shortage of concrete dialogue based examples so that people could see the actual words that were used and the actual impact that they had. And I started teaching in Georgetown about 2009, connected with the serious writing of the book with Tall Roz probably about 2013, 2014, roughly. And Tall is a genius writer. You know, there's a cliche about writing a book, and it turns out to be absolutely true. You want to write a book, you go find the book that you want to write, and you get the guy that wrote that. I was a huge fan of Never Eat Alone, Keith Ferrazzi, Tall Roz. I used to walk that book around and hand it to writers and say, write this book. They'll all say they will, and none of them will do it. not one would. And finally, we were in a position to bring Tall on board, and we made the deal, and we brought him on board. And he's a genius writer. He's smarter. Every time I get exposed to something he's done, business writing, no one comes close. And and what am I driving at here? We had a working title of the book originally was Killer Deals. And Tall said, okay, so that's a working title. Somewhere through this process, the best title to the book will occur to me. I'll tell you what it is when it does. And I have such faith in him, and still do to this day, that I said, okay. And we're about halfway. Now we're probably about 3/4 of the way through the process of finishing the book. And he said, never split the difference. That's the title. And we went, bingo. That's perfect. That hits the nail on the head exactly. And that's how we came up with the title. It's Tall's idea.
That's a great topic. It's a great thing. Did you ever think it'd become the hit that it is today?
No. You hope for it. When the book first came out, I was led to believe, all right, your expectations should be it's going to sell well for about 6 months, and it's going to fall off a cliff. So don't stop hustling. I remember Tall said specifically, you're going to have to hustle. What I would say, put the hammer down. You're going to have to put the hammer down for at least a year, if not 2. And I remember thinking, at the time, I'm like, piece of cake. You want me to put it down for 2 years? We're going to put the hammer down for 5. We're never going to let up. Well, we never let up, and it gained traction, and it has maintained at a level since, because I got a great team, and because we work very hard, and because we're helping, we're helping people have better lives. I mean, there's no downside to what we're doing. Nobody's making deals at other people's expense based on what we teach. Therefore, nobody's embarrassed to talk about learning from the book.
Last question. You've achieved so much success on a professional level, the FBI, and then on a business level now, you're reaching same level of success, if not maybe even higher now, because now you're known all over the world. What's most important to you at this point in your life?
Helping people. I mean, we literally help people have better lives. We help good people have better lives. I had an interesting conversation with a former hostage negotiator that I wanted to recruit into our world. And he was like, yeah, my brother told me business negotiations, say whatever you have to say to get your way. I'm going to continue to deal with kidnappers because there's a there's at least an ethos over here that I could believe in, and I don't believe that in the business world. Now that's the middle of the bell curve. But at the top of the bell curve in the business world is good people delivering good products and services that are having a positive impact on the planet. And those are the people that we help. We help people get to that position. And we definitely we know we're making the world a better place by what we're doing. And everybody on my team loves what we do for a living.
Last question. Do you miss the art of the FBI kind of negotiation? Because obviously there's a lot at stake, people's lives, right? Is it a different juice, a different energy than dealing, let's say, in a business boardroom, which obviously still has a juice, but the implication of someone's life or death that you were dealing with, A, do you miss it? And number two, is it the exact same in the boardroom or in the business world, or there's a different juice?
Yeah, I'm grateful having done it. I don't miss it. Well, it's a different juice now. I mean, really, literally helping people have better lives. Or, I'm on a phone earlier today with my director of operations. She loves her job. She loves what we do for a living. So does everybody else on the team. So, you know, we're all getting a big kick out of this and really enjoying waking up in the morning and what we do for a living.
Well, I want everybody, I've done 1,000 interviews. I will hands down tell you to your face and record it. That was one of the best interviews I've ever done.
Thank you.
Because I actually, for it to hit me in the face, like it did here as well. In fact, I'm going to ask you something else off air. I don't want to ask you on air just in case you say no. So I'm going to ask you off,
Okay.
just in case. Normally, I'm risking of this one. I'm not sure if I don't know if you're going to say yes or no. So everyone, pick up. That's Chris Voss. Never Split the Difference. You can get it obviously in Amazon or also the audio version as well. And my only advice to you is, if you already have it, read it again.